I've been an activist for over 20 years. I have lived with the boom and the bust of the coal industry. I drank polluted water when I was a little girl. Our watershed come from an abandoned coal mine, and our water was orange with a blue and purple film on it. And we drank that water. We used it to bathe in. And until my stepdad got laid off in the coal mines, I didn't know wasn't a redhead until I was 12 years old, and we moved to North Carolina for a while because he had to find work. I started burying a lot of my family members to black lung and cancer. And, the Industrial Revolution was built on the back of Appalachians. And a lot of people like Joe Manchin and most of our incumbents have catered to industry instead of catering to the working class. And I got really mad as a coal miner's daughter when mountaintop removal started happening because I felt like if another country come in here, blew up our mountains and poisoned our water, we'd go to war. And mechanization was taking the jobs of men. And we knew the industry was going, the market was going to decline decades ago, and nobody was working towards an economic future for West Virginians after we had sacrificed so much in Appalachians. And so, I got pissed off and mad. We lead in drug overdose deaths in West Virginia right now, and some of Shelley Moore Capito and Joe Manchin's top donors is industry, the fossil fuel industry and the pharmaceutical industry. They ship massive amounts of pills, after on the heels of us, dealing with this economic decline and treating us like collateral damage even more. So, it wasn't that I wanted to become a politician. I still don't even consider myself a politician. I am an ordinary coal miner's daughter. I'm a single mother, and I'd cut my leg off for my kids, and I was just fighting for my state. When I run, the party said that they wasn't going to show any biases, but they clearly did. Chuck Schumer came to West Virginia and stumped for Joe Manchin. They had fundraisers for the party. Joe Manchin was allowed to put his swag out on the tables, but, I was told I couldn't. And the party done everything they could. They fought in tooth and nail against, a working class West Virginian when the working class stood up, which was disgusting. But moving forward to 2020, we were told in 2018, do all the right things, get the nomination, and the party will support you. Well, we had every federal candidate, every Democratic nominee. We were all women. We were all progressive. We done our due diligence and won our nominations, and we still didn't receive any support from the party. Blue no matter who is a fallacy. The party done everything they could to support my Republican opponent, Joe Manchin and Shelley Moore Capito. Shelley Moore Capito was the first woman to be elected to the United States Senate to represent the state of West Virginia. And she's just as corrupt as Joe Manchin, and they're good family friends. They go ziplining together, they eat dinner together, and, they spend time on their yachts together. So I left the Democratic Party after the 2020 nomination because out of the heels of COVID, blatant racism from the West Virginia Democratic Party, and it's so corrupt. Manchin pretty much owns the party in West Virginia. They're not doing anything to reach voters. That's why you see the state went sweeping red because, people still have cardboard for windows. They live in impoverished conditions comparable to a third world country. And we live in the Bible Belt. And if Jesus would split the sky and say, I'm here and call himself a Democrat, people would say it was fake news because they have been victims of propaganda and they've been victims of corruption. And people are just so desperate because we are literally fighting for our lives in the Appalachian region. And I know it's not just us, it's a lot of people across the country. But it's disgusting how corrupt it is. Joe Manchin's best friend used to be the former chair of the party, and his first cousin is the chair of the party now. And they showed blatant racism with one of their executive committee meetings. And just because of COVID, it ended up being public. We didn't hear anything from the National Party. We didn't even hear from Joe Manchin, even though people were calling for Belinda Viafor's resignation. And I could not lay my head on my pillow at night and support a party that would be blatant racist, turn their backs on Appalachians, knowing that we're struggling here, knowing that our children are dying at an alarming rate. Our children are getting cancer in coal-filled communities. And, a lot of people still don't even have a clean glass of water and don't even have adequate sewage systems. Our government has failed us, and they've turned their backs not only on West Virginians, but millions of people across this country. And that's why I left the Democratic Party.
Paula Jean, can you tell me a little bit more about this instance of racism you're describing? What happened?
Well, during the executive committee, they finally developed caucuses, and they were not even letting the people with the Black caucuses and Indigenous caucuses in the spaces. They were silencing them. I don't know a whole lot about it, but it was blatant. They were silencing Black voices, and they still are. People are still fighting within these committees to have a seat at the table, and they don't have them. And it was blatant racism. You can that I've done several interviews about it. I talked to brought people on interviews that were more schooled on the topic. But if you look at the West Virginia Democratic Party's live streams and their Democratic Executive Committee live streams, you can go in and see for yourself. It's about an hour, 2 hours long. But also on my social media, if you look it up, you can also find it because I've done several interviews about it. And even the national media wouldn't even pick it up.
I want to ask you what it was like when you were campaigning in 2018 against Joe Manchin, because I've heard you say in interviews that part of why West Virginia is a red state now is because it was in Democratic control for so many years and nothing got done. And I wonder what the perception of Joe Manchin is now that he has now been in office for so many years and the status quo is still maintained in one of the poorest states in the union. What was the pitch like to try to get people to let go of Joe Manchin and vote for you in a primary? What were the biggest obstacles you encountered?
Well, I had the advantage that I was able to travel around the state in 2018. And to be honest with you, we didn't know what we were doing when I first ran for office. Our 2020 run was actually a lot better in creating a campaign infrastructure. Mm. And, getting out, we got 35% of the vote against a city, as the first time against a sitting incumbent in 75 years. Mm. So that was very telling without a good campaign infrastructure. But I was able to travel around the state and talk to people. And we see an influx of candidates that were, a lot of people were ordinary people like myself and were honest. And, it was out of the heels of the Bernie Sanders movement. And people were really responsive. In 2016, Bernie Sanders won every county in West Virginia in the Democratic primary because people were so hungry for change. And then, fast forward after a lot of propaganda, people not seeing change and a lot more corruption had been exposed out of the party. People were just desperate. So that's an opinion, but I really think that's what happened after we've looked at the data. I've talked to several voters across the state. A lot of Republicans even come to into the fold, into the 2018 campaign to help and change their party affiliation. And a lot of people in West Virginia, if you look at the numbers, they have left the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and changed, their party affiliation to independent because it's so corrupt here. And, it's been proven, I think only like 20% of Americans believe in their government. And, people are just desperate. It's not just West Virginia. People are desperate all over the country. And they're just looking for something to believe in. And our government is just so, so corrupt.
Do you think an independent could win in West Virginia?
If we built the infrastructure, they had the support, I do. Right now, I won't run for office again. I joined the People's Party, but I will not run for office again and take people's dollars. People sacrifice millions of Americans for so-called grassroots campaigns. And I think that the progressive label has been co-opted by a lot of these corporate candidates. But a lot of people gave up a lot of their time. Millions of Americans did. They gave up their money. They give up their lunch, their bill money to fight for candidates that now some of them are elected and they're not fighting for us. But I think it would be difficult. But I do think if we had a strong enough campaign and we had some accountability, I think accountability is the most important thing. I do believe that especially in the states where people are suffering the most, and it's, these states have went sweeping red after being under Democratic leadership for decades, I think that it would resonate as long as we had people that were ordinary people and not politicians. I said in 2018 and I said in 2020, we need to stop putting our politicians on pedestals. They're supposed to be public servants, and who better to serve us than us, right? We know what it's like to struggle day to day. We know what it's like to balance our checkbooks. And, we have so many people that are not showing up and they're not voting. And I feel like if we reach non-voters and we give And if we can have candidates that people can actually believe in and not turn their backs on them, I think that we'll see change not only in red states, but across the country.
There's a lot of people on the left who really felt that way and believe strongly that electing the squad members and the squad adjacent folks would be that change and make that difference. And we're very inspired by people like Cori Bush, who has this amazing personal story and was living in her car and seemed to have a closeness to the precarity that so many Americans experience, and really hoped that that would translate meaningfully, especially given the narrow margins in the House and how much power a small group of progressives have to hold up any legislative agenda, the same way that Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema are exercising that power in the Senate. And I wonder what you make of how they've done so far and some of the criticism that they've received now that they've been in office for 4 years.
Oh, one thing about Joe Manchin, I want to say, he's fallen into the rotating villain narrative. Mm-hmm. It's not been any secret, even back when Joe Manchin was a delegate, that he's been corrupt, and he's not a people servant. He's a corporate servant. And Joe Manchin, the way he's acting now is the way he's always done. Right after the 2018 campaign, he said that he was going full MAGA. He doesn't, he talks about these bipartisan efforts, but it's for his corporate donors, and it's always been that way. He doesn't work for us in Congress. He didn't work for us as a delegate. And Democrats have not had a good infrastructure to reach the non-voters and reach, an expansive base. And the same people that believe that the centrist narrative of blue no matter who are the same type of people that are voting for him, the people that really matter, the people that we need to bring to the polls. They're not, they're not regional. And as far as the squad goes, I mean, Cori Bush is a wonderful woman. I've always loved her. But I wonder what's going on, just like during Occupy Congress. Some of us went back to follow through with the efforts, and we found out that, where they were protesting, you could, even with a permit, you were not allowed to be there to sleep on, you weren't allowed to sleep on the steps, you weren't allowed to have megaphones. Your incumbents were supposed to be allowed to be there for press conferences. But when we tried to do the same thing as ordinary citizens, we got arrested. They had to get approval from Congress, which was Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, to be out there. So basically, members of Congress were, protesting Congress with the approval of Congress, and it felt like theatrics. And the decisions that they're making now, we were promised that they would go in and bust the halls of Congress wide open, and they would be strong advocates still for Medicare for all, a living wage. And, they've pulled back from that. AOC, she took grassroots money with her grassroots PAC and gave it to corporate candidates, people that did give up their lunch money, people that did work hard for her, people that did take their bill money and give it to her. She turned it around and gave it to people that she's supposed to fight against. I don't know what's going on with them. I wish that we could get answers. But this is not what we were promised. And this is why people feel so discouraged right now with this so-called movement, because millions of Americans gave up their time and money. And now we're all facing the disappointment of people making promises. And once they got there, they're not doing their jobs.
I'm curious if you've observed any appetite. I mean, I completely agree with you with respect to the rotating villain, and that if not Manchin, it would be someone else. But Manchin is the fall guy. Manchin and Sinema are the fall people for this right now. And I wonder if there have been any stirrings, if there's an increased appetite in the state for people to oppose Manchin going forward because of the perception so publicly that he is standing in the way of progress. Do you anticipate him having a tougher time than he has in previous election cycles where he's gone unchallenged?
Well, yeah, I do. I mean, he was already in trouble in 2018, and our campaign was a reflection of that. And because of propaganda and the media saying he's such a villain right now, of course, people are listening to that. He's wanted to come back. He wanted to run for governor, and in 2020, and people said, "We elected you. We want you to stay where you are." And he's still teasing about coming back and running for governor. And I'm sincerely afraid, because he's been wanting to retire and come back home for a while, because he's been in office for a long time. that the Democratic Party is going to run this so-called progressive champion against Joe Manchin, and we're going to end up with the same thing like with what happened with AOC. Is that it looks beautiful and wonderful, but once they get there, it's not going to be any different.
Do you have any insights as a West Virginian as to what's going on? Because there's been endless chatter about, whether Joe Biden could be pressuring Joe Manchin harder, whether or not, there's some incentive that should have been offered, whether or not the Biden administration should threaten to prosecute Joe Manchin's daughter over some of these pharmaceutical industry fraud allegations, and on and on and on. Are you of the belief that it's simply that Joe Manchin and the Democratic Party, Joe Manchin is being a useful idiot, playing the role of a Democratic Party, and he's not being pushed because they don't want him to be pushed? Do you think there is something that he could be offered, or that at least could cause him to experience enough pressure from within the state that he would change his mind on voting for either some of these bills or the filibuster reform or whatever it is, voting rights, whatever it is? What's your sense of what's going on there?
The thing is, the Democratic Party has known about Heather Bush and the Milan conspiracy for a long time. Everybody knows that Joe Manchin even bought his daughter an education at WVU. He has been corrupt for a really long time, and that's no secret within the party. And I think what's happening is everybody's putting the heat on Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, so they're not held accountable. Because, we're not, Joe Biden's not fighting for the things that he promised either, but it's easy to blame Joe Manchin. And even if, they went against him really hard, the point of the matter is, there's a lot of members in Congress that are funded by corporations, and, they are run by lobbyists, and they're not doing their jobs. And I've been in this movement for over 20 years. And I've seen it over and over and over where, there's always a bad guy, but at the end of the day, these people are not doing their jobs. And I think that we need to start doing our due diligence as Americans and holding these people accountable and making them do their jobs. Quit giving them your money, quit giving them your time, quit giving them your vote until they actually do what they're supposed to do. They spend a lot of money to go against us with mind-bending propaganda. And us as voters, we need to quit treating our votes like it's a football game. Democrats and Republicans, to me, they're the same party. They're funded by the same people, and it's a big tent, and we're not allowed in it. And we need to, start showing up at their offices and protesting and hold them accountable. If we don't, then we're going to end up with the same thing over and over and over and over. And there's always going to be a Joe Manchin in the world as long as we don't hold our incumbents accountable.
Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.